Right, welcome back. You're watching the Week in Review. More stories at this hour. COVID-19 cases in South Africa have now risen by over 9,000 for a second successive day. 9,253 new infections were reported in the latest 24-hour reporting cycle. The positivity rate has also risen to about 26%. 34 new deaths have also been reported, with 7 of them having occurred during the latest reporting cycle. This now takes the death toll to 100,505. In other news, related to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that Africa's first COVID-19 vaccination production facility is at risk of closing its doors as no orders for the vaccine have been received. The multi-billion rand investment made by the pharmaceutical manufacturer Aspen at its plant in Gardee is standing idle. Now, there were high hopes for the facility, but more than 6 months later, questions are now being asked.
The vaccination rate for COVID in Africa remains low. The World Health Organization says only 1 in 6 adults are vaccinated in Africa. COVID fatigue and a reluctancy to being vaccinated are the reasons for the low vaccination numbers. Logistical issues in African countries also account for the low number. If Aspen's vaccine production facility closes down, it will exacerbate these problems.
In the short term, probably not that much, because it appears as if most of the vaccine that people's actually been taking has been coming from Europe. However, long term, I truthfully believe that the continent needs to be able to manufacture its own pharmaceuticals and vaccines. And what we saw at the original start of COVID was that the numbers coming to Africa was incredibly low. Why? Because Europe and the developed world were keeping the vaccines for themselves. If another strain of the variant develops and we need a different vaccine, unless we can gain more rapid access to it, it will be a huge problem.
Africa will be the biggest loser if its ability to produce a vaccine locally is lost. It will leave the continent scrambling once again to secure vaccines if the pandemic becomes worse.
But we understand this is mainly because of the current low uptake of vaccines, not only in South Africa but across the world. It's a vaccine hesitancy. People are not coming to vaccination sites in numbers like before. Therefore, hence the countries they are reluctant to stock more vaccines because they know that and the demand is very low, the supply is high. So we believe that this decision to close down the operations as far as the production of vaccines is concerned is obviously going to be a major blow for the country, for the continent. Therefore, we'll sympathize with them. But as government, we continue to engage with them, especially while we are on the verge of entering the 5th wave.
Aspen invested $3 billion.
Right, now due to changing environments and socioeconomic pressures exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, it has obviously impacted the continent of Africa. Perhaps during Africa Month, as we shine a spotlight on the potential surrounding the relationship between what trade could look like and health on the continent as the Africa aims to recover. Dr. Siya Mtutela, Executive Vice President for Strategic Partnership and BioAfrica, joins us for this discussion. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Siya. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Lizelle. It's good to meet you.
Let's look at the story that just played, the risk of Aspen Pharmacare in South Africa shutting down its first vaccine plant in Africa. It's at risk because it hasn't received vaccine orders. How did we end up here?
Look, I mean, I'm not sure if we should be very worried that much, purely because we all know the issue of vaccine hesitancy in Africa. And however, I think the discussions between the presidents of South Africa and other countries in Africa is promising that at least Africa will see South Africa as a source of their vaccine, because we all know that most more vaccines come from Europe and the Americas, and now with the plant ready to serve and ready to supply many African countries, I think we should be able to see more African countries coming down south to order these vaccines. It is a worrying, yes it is, but I don't think to that level where we could be saying let's throw the baby with the bathwater.
All right, so with that said, perhaps as we look at the issue of meeting the challenges that have come with vaccine equity, perhaps it's also critical that policymakers develop some plans to ensure that there is equitable allocation of the more limited dosages until there's sufficient global supply at this point. This is obviously going to also have ripple effects for both the, the global north and south. Talk to us about that.
Yes, yeah. There's a number of discussions that are going on both at the global stage, like the WTO, but also within the African continent, to be able to look at why is Africa so far behind with vaccination and what can we do as Africa to ascertain that we have the supplies within the continent. Obviously, we can't change much through policy issues of advocacy issues of complacency and fatigue. But again, through government pushing advocacy towards these vaccines, we are likely to see more Africans going to take this vaccine. But I think the discussions that are out there are trying to make sure that Africa is not solely dependent on the north to get this vaccine. But it's not only Africa, it's other countries within that developing countries that would see South Africa as a potential supplier for them for these vaccines. I'm mentioning the global stage because we all know that the recent developments at the WTO on the issue of vaccine IT waiver at WTO are also going to assist us as South Africa to be able to then supply this vaccine and manufacture more, to supply the rest of the world. So I don't think I think it's a major issue, yes, that most of the South, as we call them, the global South, is not necessarily having sufficient supplies of this vaccine. But again, through these global discussions, we're trying to change that and make sure that the supply is equitable and there are no countries that are sitting with vaccines, whereas others are not fully vaccinated. As you know, that most of the Africans are not yet vaccinated, then the supply is an issue amongst other factors, but key to that is the lack of manufacturing within the continent. So through these initiatives like the Aspen one, we're trying to make sure that the vaccines are available in the continent, and we can then be able to discuss issues of trade within the continent, and supply comes from us and not dependent on the north.
Well, as we begin to mitigate against the constraints, both in relation to supply and manufacturing, I wonder if we can look at how we can begin to prepare for Africa's growing global role. How do we begin to look at Africa beyond the pandemic, the region's potential? I mean, we obviously seen the factors, including its growing young population and resources, compounded by the recent Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, also has potential to radically prioritize Africa's health as well. How do we begin to assess the relationship between trade and health?
Yeah, I think firstly we need to have the competency within the continent to be able to supply for ourselves. And I think such initiatives are not only looking at the current pandemic, but also saying, let's be prepared so that when the next wave of pandemics come, whatever it will be, we are competent in being able to supply the current existing diseases and the technologies in Africa exist. I think COVID taught us one thing, that we can be able to innovate within the continent. I mean, we've seen in the diagnostic space where most of the innovations came from the continent, and they're driven by young entrepreneurs that were able to go into the laboratories, come up with these products, as long as there was support from the African governments, and that support was able to enable them to be able to then commercialize this and bring them to the fore. So through the African Free Trade Agreement, we see now that it's not only one country serving for its own, but the market is huge and the potential to trade within the continent is much bigger. And the key issue, especially in the health space, is that of making sure the regulatory environments in the different countries is at least eased, so that one product can be able to go into other countries. Obviously, it will take a bit of time to be able to harmonize the entire continent's health regulations, but through that free trade agreement, there's a potential that we now will start to see products from South Africa being recognized and being used in Tanzania and in Kenya and on the far west of the continent. Again, most of these innovations, they come from the young innovators, young startup companies that have this potential. And our intention is that once we can be able to master these vaccine manufacturing facilities, they will be able then to be changed and repurposed whenever new pandemics come into the future, and driven by Africa for Africa's supplies.
Well, you speak about innovation, and I wonder if you could also speak to the role of digitization and how we can accelerate Africa's digital transformation as well as we link trade and health on the continent.
Actually, that's the future, that's the future.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look into what's the impact of digital health, for example, within the continent. And obviously we know that certain countries is still a major issue to have access to some of these digital technologies. But again, the future is bright from the point that some countries are starting to now lead in these technologies through the mobile cell phone technologies and through all forms of these what I call the current industrial revolutions. It's going to be a challenge, I must admit, that most of Africa is still rural and most of Africa still wants the basic or the primary health kind of facilities. But again, we can't stop there and say, no, let's not go there. But through taking these modern technologies, digitization is one of them, and using them to expand the reach of these technologies for the African continent. That's how we'll be able to reach as many of the African citizens as possible. The challenges that we face, again, as I said earlier on, not every African country or every corner of Africa has access to these technologies, and we're going to rely on major infrastructural projects to be rolled out within the continent so that we can then be able to roll out these health technologies, especially the digital ones, because digital health is where we're going from diagnostics to delivery of medicines and so forth.
Dr. Sia, I want to thank you very much for your time. Dr. Sia Mtutela, Executive Vice President for Strategic Partnership and BioAfrica, joining us to explore during Africa Month, some of the potential surrounding the relationship between both trade and health on the continent as it aims to recover after the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Let's take a quick ad break and continue with more news on the other side. Welcome back. This is the Week in Review with myself, Liesl Wilson. In other news, former EFF Secretary General Gardee says he will establish a Hillary Gardee Foundation in honor of his daughter. Gardee paid tribute through a video that was played during the funeral service of Hillary in Mbombela, Mpumalanga. Gardee has described his daughter as a fearless fighter and a brave woman.
Dear Hillary, this is a tribute from your father for the best life you lived in your time. Least in my life did the thought of presiding over the logistics of you or your siblings' funeral ever crossed my mind. We birth children to bury us and not to bury them. I was so naive. I believed I will see you grow up and I will play with your grandchildren who shall bring me. From the moment you were born, you were named after great women leaders of the world, for in you we saw a bright future. Little did we know you will die a tragic death. A death characterized by boot prints on your chest, a blunt object striking your head, stab wounds on your breast and back, a gunshot at the back of your head, and a bleeding nose. It never occurred to me and your loved ones in the family that we will have to identify you in a bush lying face down, with your hands clutching tightly on grass and shrubs, fighting for your life. Distance of crawling to the road and the grass where we found you tell us the story of a fighter we never knew. Your daughter Alia said to us, Mom said she's coming to pick me up. Mom bought me this jacket. Mom is fighting. It was the latter words and the strange stamping of a 3-year-old that sent shockwaves to our spinal cord that we are dealing with something that may end in tears. and indeed it has ended in tears. We remained strong, hoping against hope. We looked for you in bushes at Gamagugu. We went to busy streets with your photo. We went to bushes we were sent to. We called out your name at weird hours of the night, thinking you'll answer back and we'll rescue you. We never stopped searching for you up until a call came through. Booty, terminate the operation. It is done. Come to Sabi. The code was clear, and I knew what awaits me. My legs could not take me to drive the car. Those volunteers who had come to the rescue mission drove me to your last place of breath. I stumbled and fumbled and nearly fell over you. I greeted you, and you never answered back. I asked you questions. You remained silent. In the words of a great poet, Walt, your lips were pale and still. You could not hear my voice. You had no pulse. You lied fallen cold and dead. I have told the story of your gruesome death. I now turn to those who killed you. More than 100 have been kidnapped and released or left to release themselves. Their silence and silence of their close friends killed you. Those 100 and their friends who knew and came before you failed to report, nor do follow up on this crime of abduction, to use captives' ATM cards and their PIN codes. Their silence and the silence of the community and incompetence of police with active dockets of 100 similar incidences killed you, my dear. You are here. They are here. They cry the loudest. They are cowards, and their cowardice killed you. You have been killed by the silence of your country against this new crime. Everyone was silent until this gruesome death, and only now many of them are coming out. The criminals have got nowhere to hide. The spirit of Lee Matthews and Captain Pete Bielefeld lives on. They shall be found, and better the police find them before we do, for we cannot guarantee their life after citizen capture. They heard your name is Gardee and feared you'll talk, unlike the cowards who never spoke after their ordeal. They knew their days are numbered. You gave them a fight and they were frightened. They will regret emptying your bank account and taking your life for a penny. No one wanted to employ you in their companies and government departments because your surname is Gardee. You could not even be a general worker with an IT advanced diploma of UNISA. They are all here from big companies and government departments, and they remember me telling them that I have a graduate at home. Because your surname is Gardee, they dare not put their positions in line. We forgive them, but we shall not forget. I have resigned my fate that only my family business will employ children bearing a Gardee surname because their father is a member of a fearless organization, the Economic Freedom Fighters. We will miss your smile. The phone calls and text messages we had together between the 26th and 27th of April will remain indelible in my heart. I will still carry out your instructions to collect your advanced diploma in IT at UNISA. We will hang it in the memorial wall of our house until eternity. I will look after your child as my granddaughter. That is all you left with me. You loved education and you loved humanity. I will set up a Hillary Gardee Foundation as your legacy project. You and your sister Shamina designed the lion logo of our law firm and its letterhead. You designed the website of the law firm. You were a jack of all trades and master of all. You departed before I could pay for the invoice. Your siblings will miss you. Your cousins will miss you. Your congregants will miss you. Your friends will miss you. Your grandparents, aunties and uncles, local and afar will miss you. We will miss you daily with Mrs. Gardee. Lala ngoxolo nkosazana ngagadi. Lala ngoxolo gadi omuhle.
That's where we're going to leave it for you today. We'll be back tomorrow for a look at the week ahead. For myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the Week in Review team, until tomorrow, it is goodbye for now. Do stay safe.
The United Nations